Hey guys, welcome to the channel. This is probably one of the most important videos I've ever done because it's extremely pertinent in today's ecosystem, and this particular decision has been an inflection point for most people who came to the US, which is why coming to the US was such a huge deal because people coming from middle class backgrounds have made like a huge amount of fortune just purely by immigrating to the US in search of better opportunities in the last, let's say, 2 decades. So I think it's important to think about why did people move to the US like for the last 2 decades, right? And I think there are a few pointers that people say like career opportunities, standard of living, but I think it all comes down to one thing, and it's money, and all of these are like proxies of money. Quick reminder to subscribe to my channel so that I'm motivated to keep making these videos. So I think most Indians who moved to the US moved primarily for money, and well, opportunity is sort of a proxy for it because what you call an opportunity is the opportunity is to make money, right? When someone says career opportunity, they mean the opportunity to make more money through a career and nothing else. So the US was an excellent, probably still is the best place to make the maximum amount of money, especially in finance and tech for the last 2 decades. I think this is especially because our Indian education system is very cutthroat, it's very competitive, which sort of inculcates a lot of like grit and mental fortitude in us. So it's like जो भी होगा कर लेंगे type वो जो attitude है, I think that really helped the immigrant mindset. So I think that fit perfectly in what a tech company requires. As much as it requires innovation and creativity, I think it requires a lot of just hard work, pure sheer hard work, which is why most tech companies are run by, the majority of it is still Indians. So that was a major reason. Also, I think the competition here was lower as compared to that in India because, just to my previous point, since Indian ecosystem is very cutthroat, very competitive because of the huge population, less demand, more supply of labor in anything, right? Even to this day, cracking FANG in US is easier than cracking FANG in India, and I think anybody who has interviewed in any of these would probably back it up. I haven't interviewed with FANG in any of these countries, but I've spoken to a lot of people who have, and I think that holds pretty true. And not just FANG, right? Making 100k in the US is definitely a lot easier than, let's say, making 20 lakhs in India. And that is just if I'm just comparing purchasing power parity 1 to 1, but I think 100k can save you much more than 20 lakhs if you're eventually going back to India or if you're going to another country, because the dollar is more powerful than the rupee, right? So let's say after 15 years of working in US versus in India, you move to Indonesia and you have the same purchasing power parity, let's say 100k versus 20 lakh, or let's say 200k versus 40 lakhs, you will have more spending power in anywhere else just because whatever you're saving is in dollars. So making money was easier. And then there is an added layer of standard of living. But I think in the current day, standard of living also has to be defined properly. What do you call standard of living? Do you call cleaner roads, cleaner air, better, let's say, water supply, which is in the US, better standard of living? Or do you say convenience like Swiggy, Zomato, getting shit delivered to your house in 8 minutes, getting household help, cheaper healthcare? Do you define that as a better standard of living? So then it gets tricky, which country has better standard of living? Of course, on an overall, US will still have a better standard of living, but I think from a convenience standpoint, from a access standpoint, India has taken revolutionary steps in the last 7-8 years. I'm talking about these things because it's super important to identifying the why of moving to the US, because otherwise you're just lost. So the why could be money, the why could be career opportunity. So career opportunity, again, in tech, if you're doing computer science, if you're a software engineer, I'm pretty sure that if you're working in a hot startup in India, let's say Razorpay, let's say Zerodha, and all of these companies, I'm pretty sure you'll have better career opportunities per se than if you're working in Microsoft in the US. I'm pretty sure that that would happen. So you're not just moving for career opportunities if you're in tech. If you're in other streams, I would understand. For example, if you want to do like quant analytics and all, that is not yet mature in India, then you have to sort of move to the US. If you want to do, let's say, construction, well, Indian market pays, I think, around 3 LPA to freshers, and that doesn't go up a lot. Whereas in US, you can get 70, 80, probably 100k job in construction, plus the respect of labor and all of that. So if you're in electrical, if you're in mechanical, industrial, construction, all of these fields, it just makes sense to move to the US because you have nothing to lose. You can't make anything in India unless you start your own business, which is extremely hard. As an employee, you'll always be making ends meet. But in tech, given the high salaries in India and given the high growth opportunities in India, I think then it becomes like a Sophie's choice, that do you move for the extra amount of money? Is the risk worth it? How do you quantify the risk? I think that's the biggest question. So I think the first thing to think about is the US tech market has become much more competitive because of the influx of immigrants, right? The influx of international talent, right? So it used to be easy to get a job, and now it's not. It's just as simply put, it's just that. And how difficult is it? Well, I think I had put up a LinkedIn post which showed that I think around 50,000 F1 visas were allotted to just Indians in 2019, and that number has almost 3x'd. So right now it's around 150,000. And the amount of H1B, because the funnel caps at H1B, right? F1 students can, let's say, okay, jobs have also increased, right? Which I highly doubt. Jobs have not 3x from 2019 to 2022, but the supply has 3x. So the demand, I would say, has gone down by, let's say, 5%, 10% due to, let's say, automation, AI, and all of that. But the problem of the market is not AI, it's not automation, it's not the tax change that happened in 2022. It is the immense increase in supply. It is the 200% rise, right? And all of these candidates will eventually apply for H1B, and H1B is capped at 65,000 plus 20,000 for specialists. But that hasn't changed since 1990, and I highly doubt that will change. So the pool is getting bigger while the price is still constant, which brings in things like luck and probability. So that becomes tricky because now things are not in your control. So I think the first thing that I thought of when moving to the US, and which I think is a general insight that I share to other people, is do not break your finances if you have to come to the US. If you cannot afford it, like, do not mortgage your parents' only house. Because the way I see it, I think for masters at least, most people who come to the US for masters are middle class. And let's say I define middle class, and I could be wrong here. This is not data backed, but just for conversation's sake, there are two middle classes in India. And I like to put numbers on these things to maintain like the semantics of it. So when I say middle class, if your net worth is more than 2 CR, you're not middle class in India, you're essentially rich. So anything below 2 CR, your family has one house which, let's say, your parents bought or, let's say, inherited. But your total asset, including your house and everything, is, let's say, not more than 1 CR or not more than 2 CR. Anything more than that, you're just rich. If that is your case, which means that your funds are mostly like your house and then some amount of gold and then, let's say, some amount of cash. I don't think you can blow 50-60 lakhs of that, of your parents' fund, on a gamble, because it is becoming a gamble. And I'm pretty sure after, let's say, 3, 4, 5 years, I'm curious to see if there is any immigration change. I highly doubt. But if there is nothing, then it would just become a gamble, because if this 150k number of incoming students go up, it's gonna get messy. So I think it's super important to plan your finances, because this is the year, actually previous year as well, 23, 24, these are the years when we are seeing that people are going back to India with a debt of 50 to 60 lakhs of the entire tuition. This was never seen, right? So this is like the inflection point also. I feel like in 5 years there will be a dip in visas once people see that, okay, it's not all sunshine and rainbows anymore. A decade earlier, everybody came to the US, everybody got their 100k offer straight out of college, which became, let's say, 300 or 500k. Right now they're sitting on a lot of equity, they're probably in their perm filing, and things are all like rosy and great, right? And once people see that, hey, 30% of people come back, and that number increases to, let's say, 50%, and then I see that there's a 50% probability that I'll make this amount of money, and I'm putting in at stake 60 lakhs, which is, let's say, 50% of my net worth, of my family's net worth, then I think that becomes the inflection point. That is when I think things will change. Basically, my point is super important to plan your finances. If your parents are funding it, if you're taking a loan, what is your backup? And because always hope for the best, plan for the worst. And the second way to manage your finances is also choosing colleges which have a lot of decent assistantships opportunities, which is gonna take a lot of research, because even I don't know which school has more up. I just know that ASU does not have assistantship, so most people just end up paying that 48 lakhs INR, like the MRP, right? We don't get any discounts on the MRP per se. Living can be offset by on campus working, but if you can manage your tuition, let's say if I have college X versus college Y, and college Y, I know that there's a 90% chance of getting an assistantship, I would happily take it over. And you won't know for sure, but this is also based on probability. For ASU, I say it's a 1% probability that you'll get a TA or an RA. You will reduce your tuition by any sort of considerable amount. But I was speaking with someone at GSU, Georgia State University. He's also co-intern with me. So we're saying that most people get at least one semester of internship where somewhat of their fees gets waived up. So if you can get into a school where you keep your costs very low, because the difference between 20 lakhs and 60 lakhs is huge, especially if you're taking out a loan, because that compounds, right? So if you can keep your cost within a certain limit which is digestible for you, then that makes sense. I think for me, the number was 50 lakhs. So me and my friend, we were applying together, and he went to CMU. He's graduating in August, but his appetite was a little bit more. We are both from similar backgrounds, but it's just that his appetite was more. So he took this, I didn't apply for CMA because I could never imagine spending 80 lakhs. Even if I make that money later, I could not imagine spending 80 lakhs. That used to bother me a lot. So knowing that if I cannot get a job, I can manage the 50 lakhs debt, but I can't manage the 80 lakhs debt is important. So you have to have that number that, let's say, if you do not make it, what is the backup? How much debt can you afford? And if your family is well off, then obviously, then these sort of things don't matter that much. So that's on the finances, because finances will help you quantify that risk. Which brings me to the second point. Whenever someone reaches out to me with their profile and it's like, should I come to the US? My first question is, how much are you making in India? Because I think if you're making, let's say, 15 lakh, around 15 lakhs straight out of college, and that doesn't have to be 15, it could be 11, it could be 12, but anything, let's say, in that range, then I feel like you can make a lot of money in India without the risk. And this is where I think I always ask people to run hard numbers. And I think Parth, who is a famous YouTuber, also mentioned his number was 20. So if you're making north of 20, you should probably not come to the US, because there's like a 50-50 chance that you can make more money in India in a 3-year time frame. I say 3-year because you get 3 years of sure shot like OPT. H1B is not in your hands. So if you get H1B and if you keep on working in US, then obviously you will make more money because the dollar is more powerful than the rupee. But if you have to go back in 3 to 4 years, then should you give up your 20 LPA job for a 120k? Well, the numbers need to be run. Location comes into picture. Where are you making 120k versus where are you making 20 lakhs, and what are your prospects with 20 lakhs? But I feel like whoever is making around that number straight out of college in that 12 to 15, they can go up to like 40 LPA within 4-5 years, which is a solid number. I'm talking about like Sui One, whichever company pays, and this is very well known. I'm not inflating any number, like any FANG or any hot startup. When I say hot startup, I mean like, again, Zomato, Zerodha, Razorpay, Cred, Navi, all of these companies, Atlassian, Postman, all of these companies, they pay. For Sui 1, they pay, the base is around 15, and for Sui 2, the base could be anything around 25 to 35, and the package is inflated. But let's just talk about the base. And then for Sui 3, you can go towards 50, 55. So, and you can go to Sui 3 in like 5 years, right? So that is an insane amount of money. And I feel if you're just coming for money at that point, then it gets really tricky, because there's a 50% chance that you will probably not make as much money. Like, you're leaving more prospects in India. But I've also seen people who are above the 20 mark. I was above the 20 mark when I came, although I reached that mark after 2 years of working. But my friend and I, the friend that I just mentioned, CMU, so both of us were above that mark, but we still came to the US because our motivation was not money. And I was very sure, and I'm still sure, that I think that I could have made more money in India. Our motivation to come to the US was not to make more money. It was just a change of pace. It was just to see how things work in the other side of the world, just to see for 5 years, 5-6 years, and then come back. As long as we are not making significantly less amount of money in the US, which is unlikely, it's fine. But if you're making, let's say, 3 or 4 LPA, which is the case for most colleges who do not have placements, we got these packages because of the placement boards. It's not like we were special or anything. So if you're making that amount of money, like 3 to 6 LPA, then I sort of think about it this way, then you're not risking a lot, because this is the baseline is very low. So unless you are risking like 10, 15 or 20 LPA job, then you're not really risking anything. So then you might as well take the risk, right? And I don't mean to be crude about it, but it's just a simple risk reward calculation, and that number needs to make sense for you, because somebody would never give up even a 15 LPA job, because they have to support their parents and they have to support their families and all of that, right? So their 15 LPA is very important to them. But for me, I could get away with even losing that 20 plus job, because I did not have any dependence on me. Even like, I know a lot of people who are even making more than that, like Sui 2, and Sui 2 generally make 30 plus. So whenever they are coming to the US, like with 4-5 years of experience, it's generally because it's okay, they're good on the money front, they're just coming for a change of pace. So to wrap up, it is important to understand whether you're coming for money. For career opportunity, if you're in tech, I think you're lying to yourself. Career opportunity is better in India at this point. But if you're in industrial, if you're in mechanical, if you're in CMT, then I think it's just, for 90% of the time, it would just make sense for you to come to the US. Tech is where I think it's 50-50 at this point. It might go towards 40-60 and 30-70, where gradually it will become less sense to come to the US. I think that inflection point might be in the future, might not be in the future. That's just a thought. Or are you coming just for a change of pace and have different experience? Just work in tech, but in a different country. I think that's fair. I just feel that if you're doing something for that, don't do it by breaking your family's finances or even your finances. And don't do it if you have a lot to lose. Like, for example, in India, you have a lot to lose. And this could be in terms of family, this could be in terms of money, this could be in terms of social connections. I think the entire idea of should you come to masters depends depends on now quantifying the hard numbers. And there's a lot of talk about should you come to the US with experience or without experience. Honestly, there is no way for us to check whether with experience it is easier to get jobs, because I've seen freshers getting Amazon and people with very good experience in India struggling to get callbacks. There's not a lot of data to say this empirically, but from what I feel, if you have 3 years of work experience, then it sort of makes sense, and that too in an MNC, then I think that sort of helps in the resume. I can't say this for sure, this is just my opinion. I think that would help in getting a fair amount of callbacks, but I don't think that's substantial. For example, a fresher has a 2% callback rate. I'm pretty sure someone with experience will have a 3% callback rate. It won't be like 15% callback. After 3 years is when a lot of orgs have a different level, like software engineering 2, or let's say associate. Let's say if you're doing data engineering, then data engineering 2, things like that. I think 3 years is a good sort of metric. If you're doing like 1.5 years of experience, you might as well come as a fresher and do some amount of project to make your resume. But that 1.5 years of experience, I don't think that will give you any substantial delta on top of a fresher. I'm not sure if this covered everything. I think there's a lot to talk about in every one of these facets, like finances, or let's say comparing your Indian salary to at what point should you say that, hey, okay, I'm making too much money in India and I should probably not risk this for a gamble in the US. Even for programs, I think for some programs it just makes sense to move to the US because the pay is peanuts in India. I think there's a lot to talk about in that space as well. But this is more of an overview of how I thought about coming to the US. This is not advice, it's more like an insight of how I processed it. I think a lot of people try to simplify this problem by saying that, hey, if you have 3 years of experience, then you should come to the US. Or hey, if you're going to a top 20 school, you should come to the US. But I don't think all of these things are relevant anymore. USC's internship rate is as good as ASU's internship rate, is as good as NCSU's internship rate. When the market's bad, your flashy degree will not stand out as much as you think it would. So that's my 2 cents. If you want me to talk further about any one of these topics, it could be finances, or it could be discussing a 100k salary versus a 20 LPA salary, things like that. Let me know in the comments. If you disagree with any of these, let me know in the comments, and we can probably have a conversation. But I think more and more people are getting stuck in this decisioning phase, and rightfully so, because it's an inflection point. It can make or break you. I've commitments to 2 people on LinkedIn who I've told that I'll post this by the next week. But yes, I'll see you in the next one.